My mother picked out her outfit for the Hartwell dinner 3 weeks in advance. I know because she called me to describe it. The navy Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress, the pearl drop earrings she'd worn to my cousin Rebecca's wedding, the low block heels she decided were powerful but not threatening. She wasn't calling to include me in the excitement. She was calling, in her particular and practiced way, to establish that something significant was happening that I was not part of. This was a communication style she had refined over 34 years of motherhood, and I will give her this. She had perfected it. "Your father and brother have been working on this pitch for 8 months, she said. Hartwell Industries could change everything for the family business. This is the most important dinner of our lives, Claire." I was standing in my kitchen in downtown Chicago, still in my work clothes, eating leftover Thai food out of the container. My cat, Biscuit, was making a determined and ultimately unsuccessful attempt to climb my left leg. "That sounds really exciting, Mom," I said. "It is." A pause, the particular pause she uses when she is approaching something she has already decided. "I just want you to know we won't have room for you at the table. It's a business dinner. Very specific seating arrangements. We need everything calibrated." I told her I understood completely. She seemed faintly disappointed that I didn't argue. I put the phone down, fed Biscuit his prescription kidney food, finished the pad CEW, and then texted Marcus Reeves. "They're pitching Thursday. Hartwell dinner. I need you to handle the seating at Marisol." Marcus replied in 11 seconds. "Already done. Front corner table. Your usual. This is going to be something, Claire." I smiled at my phone and went to bed. Here is what my family knows about me, assembled from years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, and the particular kind of attention families pay to members they've already decided to understand. I am 34 years old. I attended the University of Illinois on a partial academic scholarship, while my brother Derek attended Northwestern on our parents' funding, a distinction my father has never mentioned aloud, but which has always been present in the room like a piece of furniture everyone steps around. I drove a used Honda Civic for 6 years. I live alone in a downtown apartment that my mother describes as cozy, which is her word for spaces that don't impress her. I have never been married, which my mother addresses at a frequency that suggests she considers it a personal project. I have a cat named Biscuit who has kidney disease and costs me $340 a month in veterinary care, which my father once called excessive for an animal. I worked for a long time at what my father referred to as that little consulting thing. He said it with a particular vocal softness, not mockery, exactly, but the verbal equivalent of patting something on the head. My mother backed him up by asking, at nearly every gathering, whether I'd thought about something more stable. My brother Derek, who had built a legitimate mid-sized consulting firm with our parents' financial backing and considerable cheerleading, was kind enough not to pile on. Derek has always been the least unkind member of my family, which is not the same as being kind, but in my family it has always been enough to make him my favorite. What my family does not know about me is considerably more interesting than what they do. When I was 26 years old, fresh out of a 3-year stint at a mid-market financial advisory firm and quietly certain I was capable of more than I was being allowed to do, I attended a small business conference in Indianapolis. It was not a prestigious conference. The name badges were lanyards with printed paper inserts. The lunch was a buffet with one vegetarian option. I had gone because my then manager had recommended it, and because the hotel rate was manageable, and because I had, at 26, the energy to believe that the right room at the right time could change everything. I gave a 15-minute panel talk on liquidity risk management in mid-market portfolio companies. By my own honest assessment, it was competent but unremarkable. I used one good analogy about water pressure and one PowerPoint slide I was proud of and said nothing the audience hadn't heard before, though I said it with more precision than most. James Hartwell, too, found me in the hallway afterward, near the coffee station. He was 61 at the time, and he had the quality that genuinely self-made people sometimes possess, a complete absence of performance. He was wearing a good but not exceptional blazer. He introduced himself by first name only. He said, "You see structural problems the way engineers see load-bearing walls. Most people in this field see the paint." He handed me a business card. "I have a problem I'd like you to look at." I did not know who he was until I Googled him in the elevator on the way to my room. Then I sat on the hotel bed for approximately 4 minutes processing the information, and then I called my friend Dara and said, "Something just happened and I need to tell someone before I convince myself I imagined it." The problem James Hartwell II showed me was a $340 million investment portfolio with structural inefficiencies that were bleeding value in the quiet, compounding way that doesn't announce itself in quarterly reports but becomes catastrophic over a decade. He had two senior advisors who hadn't caught it. I caught it in 40 minutes over coffee, in documents he handed me across a table at the conference hotel. I want to be honest about the next 2 years, because the stories people tell about professional ascent tend to sand off the parts that were genuinely hard. I was 26. I was a woman, a young Asian American woman, in rooms that had been designed, consciously or not, for a different kind of person. I was introduced at my first Hartwell board meeting as James's new consultant, a title so deliberately vague that I spent the following 3 months proving, through sheer volume of correct analysis, that it needed to be updated. I worked hours that I would not recommend to anyone I care about. I made mistakes, some of them expensive, all of them instructive. I fixed the portfolio. I grew it by $61 million over 14 months. James Hartwell II gave me an 8% managing partnership stake in Hartwell's private investment division. He did this formally in writing with legal documentation I had reviewed myself. He said at the signing, "My son is going to run this company someday, and he's going to need someone in the room who sees the walls." I have thought about that sentence many times since. I told no one in my family, not my parents, not Derek, not my aunts or uncles who asked every Thanksgiving what exactly I did for work. I gave vague answers about investment consulting and let their eyes glaze over and changed the subject to something they were more interested in, which was almost anything else. I won't explain why, because people assume the answer is anger, and it isn't, or not only. The truth is more specific. I had watched my entire life the way money functioned in my family as a sorting mechanism. People who had it were worth impressing. People who didn't were worth pitying. My parents were not malicious people. They were people who had grown up in circumstances that had taught them to rank, and they had never questioned the ranking system because it had never cost them anything to believe in it. What I had seen, over and over, was that revealing financial success to my family would not change how they saw me. It would change how they performed seeing me. I would become someone they needed something from, and every interaction would be flavored by that need, and I would lose the last remnant of being known as just their daughter, even a disappointing one. So I kept the Honda. I kept the apartment. I showed up to Sunday dinners and listened to my father explain macroeconomics to me with the patience of a man who assumes the person across from him has read less than he has, which in my case was not remotely true, but which I never corrected. I built, in parallel to this quiet domestic invisibility, a professional life that I found genuinely absorbing. I traveled. I read constantly. I had a small, excellent group of friends. Dara, who was my college roommate and was now a family medicine doctor 8 months pregnant with her second child. Philip, who taught high school history and made the best jerk chicken I had ever eaten. Renata, who ran a nonprofit focused on financial literacy in underserved high schools and who I quietly funded through an anonymous donor structure that had taken my accountant 4 hours to set up properly. I had a life I liked. I had work I was good at. I had Biscuit, who was expensive and ungrateful and whom I loved without reservation. I was not waiting for a confrontation. I was not constructing a revenge narrative. I was just living, and my family was a complicated presence in that life, the way families often are. And then Derek's pitch landed on Marcus's desk. 6 weeks before the dinner, Marcus flagged it with a single text. A firm called Ellison Consulting Group submitted a proposal for our operational restructuring contract. $2.3 million annual. Do you know them? I sat with that question for 3 days. I knew them. Derek had started Ellison Consulting Group 7 years ago with $80,000 of our parents' money and a genuine talent for operational strategy that he'd spent the intervening years developing into something real. The firm had 12 employees and a solid regional reputation and a tendency toward over-leverage that I recognized as our father's intellectual inheritance. The Hartwell contract would be the biggest thing they'd ever landed. It would change Derek's trajectory. It would validate 8 months of work and every conversation my parents had quietly had about whether Derek's company was going to make it. I called Marcus. "Let it advance to the final round," I said. "And book me at Marisol for Thursday. The private room. My usual table. You want James there?" James already knows. Because James Hartwell III, who had grown up watching his father treat me like a trusted partner, who had inherited the company and my partnership stake and a 7-year professional relationship, who called me Claire the way people call someone by their first name when they mean person I actually trust, had texted me 4 days earlier. "Your family's pitching us Thursday. Do you want me to handle this, or do you want to be there?" I had replied, "I'll be there. Just be yourself." He sent back, delighted. "Shall I be horrifying or merely bewildering?" I sent back, "Somewhere in between. Bring the good cufflinks." The week of the dinner moved the way weeks do, when something is coming. Faster in the ordinary moments, slow in the quiet ones. I had my Tuesday portfolio call, pushed back on a proposed acquisition I thought was being rushed by a team that had fallen in love with the deal and stopped seeing it clearly, and wrote a 12-page analysis that I sent at 11 p.m. with a note that said, "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." I had lunch with Dara on Wednesday. She was 8 months pregnant and exhausted and deeply annoyed by her mother-in-law's opinions on birth plans, and I listened and ate my salad and told her she was allowed to simply not answer the phone, which she already knew but needed to hear from someone else. I picked up biscuits, prescription food. I went to the farmer's market and bought tulips and a good loaf of sourdough and stood in the autumn sunlight for 20 minutes doing nothing in particular, which I had learned in my early 30s to treat as a necessary activity rather than a guilty one. My mother called Thursday at 4 p.m. "The dinner is at 7, she said. "Derek's been rehearsing all week. His presentation is absolutely airtight."
She paused.
"I just wanted to make sure you understand why we can't include you. It's not personal, Claire. We need the energy to be right." I have thought about that phrase many times since. The energy to be right. What she meant was that my presence complicated something for them, disrupted the performance of a family that had its act together, presenting a son with a thriving company and a future, with a daughter who drove a used Honda and worked in consulting and had not managed to get married. I understood what she was protecting, even if I thought she was wrong about what needed protecting. "I hope it goes really well for Derek," I said. And I meant it. This is the thing about complicated family feelings. They are genuinely complicated. I was not purely at peace, and I was not purely resentful. I loved my brother. I wanted the pitch to go well. I also wanted, for reasons I had been examining honestly for the past 6 weeks, for the truth to finally be in the room. I wore the charcoal blazer. I did my hair. I took a cab to Marisol. James was already there. He is constitutionally incapable of arriving anywhere after the agreed time, which is either a virtue or a personality disorder depending on your own relationship with punctuality. He stood when I walked in, which he always does, not as a performance, but as an ingrained habit from a father who had insisted on it. We ordered the sea base and the burrata to start, and a bottle of something Burgundian that James selected, and I deferred to because his palate is better than mine, and I know my limitations. We talked about his daughter Sophie's school play, in which she had been cast as a talking tree and was approaching the role with what James described as alarming commitment. We talked about the restructuring of our Pacific Rim holdings, which was taking longer than projected because of a regulatory issue in Singapore that our legal team was navigating. We talked about whether the Cubs had any realistic hope this season, and agreed with the resigned equanimity of longtime fans that hope was perhaps not the operative framework. It was, in other words, a normal dinner between two people who had worked closely together for 7 years and had developed the particular ease of a professional relationship that had long since become genuine friendship. I was not performing. I was not waiting. I was just having dinner. At 7:14, I saw Marcus appear at the entrance to the private dining room. He caught my eye, the specific look he uses when something is about to begin, and stepped aside. My mother entered first. She was wearing the navy Diane von Furstenberg, the pearl earrings, the block heels. Her smile was deployed, the wide, slightly too bright smile she wears when she is trying to make a room feel that she belongs in it, which is heartbreaking if you know her well enough to recognize the effort it represents. Behind her came my father in the good charcoal suit he reserves for occasions he's decided are important, and Derek with his presentation portfolio tucked under his arm with the precision of someone who has rehearsed even the carrying of it, and Derek's business partner Tom, who I have met twice at family events and who always appears to be slightly uncertain about his own shoes. They were shown to a table on the far side of the room. It was a good table, white tablecloth, proper glassware, a small arrangement of seasonal flowers. Not the corner table, not the best table. They wouldn't have known the difference under normal circumstances. My mother scanned the room. This is something she does everywhere she goes, a rapid, practiced inventory that catalogs and ranks the social landscape. I have watched her do it my entire life. She locates the power center of any room within 30 seconds. It is, I will say, a genuine skill, whatever use she has put it to. Her eyes moved to the corner table. To James Hartwell III, unmistakably himself in a dark suit, present in that relaxed, gravitational way of people who have never needed to announce their authority because authority has simply always surrounded them. To the woman seated across from him, back partially turned, in a charcoal blazer with her hair swept back. The recognition moved across my mother's face the way a crack moves through glass. First just a hairline fracture, then the whole structure quietly, irrevocably shifting. She stopped walking. She reached for my father's arm without looking at him. My father followed her gaze and went still. Derek, 2 steps behind, looked up from his portfolio and stopped mid-step. Tom walked into Derek from behind. No one acknowledged it. I did not look away. I had decided, on the cab ride over, that I would not look away when this moment came. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. Out of honesty. I had been looking away for 8 years. I was done with that. James noticed the stillness in the room the way he notices everything, without theater, without announcement, with the simple attentiveness of someone who has always paid attention to what rooms are doing. He turned, took in my family frozen near the entrance, and looked back at me. His expression was composed, but I have known James long enough to recognize the particular quality of restraint he was exercising. Is that them? That's them. He set his napkin on the table and stood, and he crossed the room with the unhurried ease of someone for whom crossing rooms has always been simple, and he extended his hand first to my mother, who took it reflexively, the way you catch something thrown at you before you've decided whether you want it. Mrs. Ellison. His voice was warm, completely genuine. James is not a cruel man. I'm James Hartwell. I've been genuinely looking forward to meeting Claire's family. My mother's mouth moved. I was across the room and couldn't hear what she said, but I could see her trying to locate the ground beneath her, the reassembly of a social framework that had just been entirely rearranged. James shook my father's hand. He said something to Derek that made Derek give a single, bewildered nod. Then James turned back toward our table and gestured, with easy hospitality, and said something that I did hear from across the room. Please, join us for a moment. We were just finishing the first course. What happened in the next 45 minutes, I will try to describe with fairness. My family sat. My mother across from me, my father to her left, Derek beside him, Tom having been tactfully redirected to a separate small table by Marcus, with a smooth efficiency that made Marcus extraordinarily good at his job. James flagged the sommelier and added glasses for everyone, a gesture so natural it precluded any discussion of whether this was happening. The conversation was James's masterpiece. He did not expose anyone. He did not perform dominance. He simply talked about Hartwell's history, about his father, about the philosophy behind the investment division, about the things he valued in professional partnerships, and in doing so, he assembled for my family a portrait of who I was and what I had built, brick by unhurried brick, without ever pointing at it directly. Your daughter found a structural problem in our portfolio in 40 minutes. He said to my father, not unkindly, conversationally, the way you'd mention a fact about weather. In 14 years of working with advisors, I've met 3 people who could have done that. She's one of them. My father looked at me, not with the expression I expected, not embarrassment, exactly, though that was there. He looked at me with something I had not seen on his face before. Something that might have been, if I am being generous to him, the beginning of a question he should have asked a long time ago. My mother was quieter than I had ever seen her in a social setting. She held her wine glass. She looked at the tablecloth. Once, she looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, too many things moving across it at once, grief and confusion, and something that in a different context I might have called shame, though in my mother shame has always been deeply uncomfortable and therefore briefly inhabited. Derek, to his credit, did not pretend. When James said, "I understand your firm prepared a proposal for us," Derek nodded and then said, with a directness that I recognized as the best version of him, "I didn't know Claire was involved with Hartwell." "She's been our managing partner for 7 years, James said. Derek set down his fork. He looked at me, not with anger, not with the complicated performance the moment might have invited. He looked at me with the expression of a person who is genuinely recalculating. 7 years, he said. 7 years. I confirmed. A silence. "Did you know about our pitch?" he asked. 6 weeks ago, I said. I asked James to let it advance to the final round. "The work your team submitted was genuinely strong, Derek. The methodology section, especially." This was true. I had read the proposal. It was the best work his firm had ever produced. Something moved across Derek's face that I was not prepared for. Relief. Not about the pitch. Something older than the pitch. "You could have just told us," he said quietly. "I know," I said. Later, after James had excused himself with the practiced grace of someone who understood that a family needed the room, my father asked me why. Not aggressively. Not performatively. He asked me the way someone asks a question when they're not sure they want the answer, but have decided they need it anyway. I told him the truth. Not all of it at once. And not without difficulty. I told him that I had watched my whole life the way their love was conditional on legibility, on being something they could explain, something that fit the map they'd made of how lives were supposed to go. And I had not fit that map since I was 19 years old, and I had spent a long time trying to before I stopped trying and just became myself instead. And the self I had become was someone they had not known to look for. My mother cried. Not the performative tears she sometimes deployed, real ones, quiet and uncomfortable, the kind she didn't know what to do with. She said, "I just wanted you to be okay." "I know," I said. "I am okay. I've been okay for a while." "We didn't know you." "No," I said. "You didn't. This is the thing no one tells you about being finally seen by people who should have seen you sooner. It is not relief, exactly. It is not triumph. It is something more ambivalent than that, a kind of grief for the years when it would have meant something different, a complicated opening that might grow into something real or might not, and which cannot be hurried." We sat at that table for another hour after James left. We ate the food. We talked, haltingly, imperfectly, like people learning a language in real time. Derek told me that the proposal had been his idea, that he'd found Hartwell on a list of target clients and spent 8 months building toward it, and he'd had no idea. I believed him. I told him the methodology work was excellent. He said, "Would you look at the rest of it sometime?" Honestly, I said I would. Tom, at his separate small table, appeared to be having a perfectly adequate dinner and did not seem to have fully understood what had happened, which I thought was probably fine. The Hartwell contract outcome, James and I discussed it the following Monday. The proposal had genuine merit, and I recused myself from the final vote, which was the right thing to do, and which James agreed with without needing to be asked. The decision was made on the work alone. Derek's firm won a partial contract, a $1.1 million pilot engagement, smaller than what he'd pitched, but real and earned, and a legitimate foot in the door. Derek called me when he found out. He said, "Was this you?" I recused myself, I said. A pause. "I believe you," he said. And then, "Thank you for letting it go to the final round." "The work deserved it," I said. 3 weeks later, my mother called on a Tuesday, not to deliver information, not to perform something, just to call. She asked about Biscuit. She asked about Marcus, who she'd Googled after the dinner and described as very impressive. She asked if I'd be at Christmas, and when I said yes, she said, "Good. I want you there." It was a small thing. It was also not nothing. I am not going to tell you that everything changed because it didn't. Not entirely, and not cleanly. My father still sometimes explains things to me that I know better than he does, though he catches himself now, which is different. My mother still has opinions about my relationship status, though they have become, fractionally, more questions and less declarations. Derek and I have had 3 actual conversations since the dinner, real ones about real things, the kind we never had growing up because we were too busy performing our assigned family roles. I still drive a practical car, because I prefer it. I still have the apartment because it is mine and I like it. Biscuit's kidneys are stable, which costs me $340 a month, and which I consider money exceptionally well spent. And I still have dinner with James every few weeks at Marisol, at the corner table, which is the best table in the house. We talk about the portfolio and his daughter's theatrical ambitions, and whether the Cubs have any hope, which they generally don't, and about the peculiar and specific weight of being known, fully known, by the people who matter most to you. It is, I have found, a weight that gets lighter when you finally stop carrying it alone.